Welcome to the Sunday Superversive Livestream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and I'm here with Anthony Marquetta. Anthony, how are you doing today?
I'm having a wonderful day. They let me out to see the sun today.
Oh my goodness. I'll speak to the
It
warden
rained,
about
but
that.
yeah, it
Unacceptable.
rained, but All right. Anyway, how are you, Ben?
I'm doing pretty well, thank you. Uh,
So,
yeah, no, so today what we're talking about is themes in media, literacy, even. And by that I mean media literates can go to hell uh, because
yeah,
we're bringing everything back to Christ. That's right, we fooled you, and I didn't tell Anthony this, but this is a Bible stream. No, no, we will be doing this quite a bit. It'll happen naturally, I swear.
it's true.
Yeah, and of course we can start with obvious ones like Pilgrim's Progress, and then mostly obvious ones like the Chronicles of Narnia. And then we can do even slightly more obtuse ones like the Lord of the Rings. And then actually I don't really know cuz it like the Lord of the
Dante's
Rings.
Inferno.
Oh, no, that's like Pilgrim's Progress tier, my dude.
Oh, you mean like even less obvious than Lord of the Rings?
Yes. Cuz like if you think about it, right? Pilgrim's Progress and Dante Inferno are incredibly obvious about their themes of Christ, Christianity, how we lost a viewer.
Of course we did.
Yes,
Who wouldn't?
yes. Uh, Christ, Christianity, the man's relationship to God, and man's travel through life and through hell or this world. The theming is, of course, on point. It's obvious. It is designed as much as a piece of art as it is a lesson in biblical storytelling and biblical ideas. So the themes are actually on the sleeve of the book. Even Lord of the Rings, which doesn't exactly necessarily explicitly state things or implicitly state things, like with Aslan, for example. Oh, Solomon Kane's there. He's just not as obvious, we'll say. The raging Puritan is not as obvious as the. Okay, fine.
Mm,
Yes. No, 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 no. I'm being silly. Uh, no, Solomon Kane is certainly up there. Uh, interesting. We'll get to him. Don't worry. We'll definitely get to him. Um,
oh, thank goodness.
so and then there's a degradation down. Certain things like the Nightland are themselves fantasy and quasi allegory. Not as obviously allegory as something like Pilgrim's Progress or the Chronicles of Narnia or even Lord of the Rings, but the themes there are incredibly strong. In the Nightland, the only thing that preserves people against the terrors of the night around them is love, and God sometimes reaches
Yeah,
down as a good power to prevent your destruction by the evil powers.
Nightland is also a weird one in that it might all be an elaborate dream sequence.
Brought on by the stress of his wife dying in childbirth?
Yep. Isn't that like implied in the first chapter?
Yep.
Which is why a lot of fans hate the first chapter.
Well, it's like the first chapter like I don't know why, but this is an aside. I know, but for some reason, a lot of those books had like especially like things like the Worm Ouroboros and whatnot, like had these weird like introductory chapters that like never come up again except for like once or twice, or come up again at the beginning and end. And it's like you didn't need the framing, but I guess we can have it. And it's always the same. I had a weird dream, and then it's just the normal story. I'll admit that is one pulp thing that I actually am pretty okay with not having anymore. Um, because it was all over the place and it lasted until the 1950s. Uh, easy, even to the 60s, quite frankly, with the drug trips and whatnot. Um, Solomon Kane is interesting, partially because Robert E. Howard was more than confident enough to just have his stories as presented without dreams and without sequences. The theme of Solomon Kane being an arbiter for justice via the violence he meets on evildoers is certainly a strong, worthy theme that many people wish they had the fortitude to perform, but simply don't. Uh,
Yeah, and let me be entirely fair as well. With the Nightland, it is not clear. Like he does not say. It is not necessarily clear that it is a dream sequence, right? It could be a
mm-hmm.
past life memory. So, in fact, that's like the implication. That's like the later
Yes.
implication. It's just kind of left, sort of ambiguous. Like, yeah, it could be a past life memory, but like, it's also like probably more plausible that he just made all this shit up. Um, but it's also like the way that they link it is that it's like this was a past life, and now it's now, you know, like
Yes.
now it's the future. But yeah, in terms of themes, like let's try and focus on the general subject here a little more. Okay, so first off, Ben,
Mm-hmm.
you're a writer. What is a theme?
1 second.
Oh no, he's gonna fail his ninth grade English quiz.
I never actually. So, this is Anthony. This is very embarrassing. I never actually think about what a theme is, definitionally, as in from Webster's. Which, speaking of Webster's, Webster's is a theme, central, deeper meaning of a literary work that the writer conveys or implies to the reader. It's.
You use Webster's.
I
All
didn't.
true dictionary aficionados use Oxford.
I didn't even use Webster's. I used Discount Webster's, a website called
You use
literarydevices.net.
dictionary.com.
I use
Okay, good.
literarydevices.net.
You know what?
Uh,
Better than Webster's, so I'll take it.
yeah, it's true. Don't use Webster's. At least post 1956 or something like that. It got bought out by
Somewhat.
somebody, something like that.
Oxford is the way to go.
Yeah. So no, I of course knew what a literary theme was. I always did. uh,
And you can never prove otherwise.
can't do it. I'm gonna cut this previous section out of the live stream. All right, all right, all right, all right. Is he? I find the definition of theme to be fairly. Um, what's the word I want? Not developed enough for what it actually is because
Yeah,
it's a simple definition explaining a very complex idea that somebody's spending an entire book to discuss.
like it's the thing about a lot of writing tropes. When you're a writer, there's a sense where you're like constantly thinking about all of this stuff, but it's more as an integrated whole than as like, so what will my theme be? Or what is the theme? Like, and then you go, well, were you thinking of what the book was about? Were you trying to say something? And the answer has to be yes.
Yes.
You're never not saying something. By definition, by writing something down, you're saying it, right?
Yes.
So you're always saying something, but it's never like when you're actually writing something. While you definitely do have themes, you can't not have them.
Right.
It's when you, it's more like you think of it, at least in my case anyway, as part of like the integrated whole of the work, right?
Yes.
So here's an example. Uh, my last Pinkerton's ghost story, which was Achilles complex, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, what is the theme of Achilles complex? Well, when I came up with the idea for the story, I didn't have a theme specifically in mind. Rather, this was based on two. The reason I came up with the story idea was for two reasons: plot mechanics, one, and two, it was a horror concept that we hadn't used yet that I thought worked well with the character of Sean, right?
Yes.
Which is, somebody called it backrooms horror, which is interesting because that's absolutely what it is, but I did not think of the backrooms at all. Like, like when he said it, I'm like, oh yeah, I guess it is backrooms horror. But like, I was not thinking of the backrooms. Rather, the horror that I had in mind was the horror of the man who works the 9 to 5 job that does nothing in the world and with no hope for the future. I'm not saying, and I do not believe, that all people in regular 9 to 5 office jobs are in that position. What I am saying is there is that position is often associated with the menial office work, right? Uh, I hope that makes some sense,
Yes.
because I do want to clarify. I think that the media like picks on this, where they go, like in the movie Office Space, which, don't get me wrong, is a fine movie. I'm not, but what I mean is like they pick on it, like if you work an office job, you're not giving anything to the world, or right, and you're just
Yes.
stuck as a drone. I don't really believe this at all, because I think if you're making a good living for your family, then you are contributing something to the world. Uh, and if you're making a living for yourself. However, I think that when you divorce it from like those larger realities of family, society, and God, and then you just go to, well, I go to my 9 to 5 job every day because that's the thing that you do, right? Uh, that's when it turns into a sort of horror. So that was the thing that I was tapping into.
Mm.
Now, you might say, okay, didn't you just describe the theme? And in a sense, you are correct, right? And what's the thing that breaks Sean out of this? This was very specific. The thing that breaks Sean out of the horror is the rage he feels at the death of his ex-wife, right?
Yes.
The extreme anger. So it's a connection with real human beings, right? Things outside of the workplace, but a strong emotional connection, a meaning, right? In other words, he has a purpose that is driving him that isn't the office.
Right.
That's the idea. Now, what I have just described is essentially a theme to the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you break out of this loop, this rut? Well, the way you break out of it is by not losing that larger purpose to your life, right?
Yes.
Not reducing your life to the office. However, when I wrote the story, I was not writing it to express this theme specifically, right? This was the piece of the larger puzzle. I was writing it to be like, well, what is the horror like? And if this is what the horror is like, how would you escape that horror? What is the thing that would get you out of it? This inevitably leads into something like the theme. Tolkien, by the way, talks about something similar, because in his famous letter where he says that the Lord of the Rings is Catholic, right, in philosophy, this is a very famous letter he wrote. One thing that's often missed is that he admits that in the first draft of the Lord of the Rings, it was unconsciously Catholic. Then he says, he is very clear to say that he consciously makes it Catholic in the rewrites. So it is very explicitly Catholic, like by the version we have, but his original version was not. What does that tell you? Well, it tells you, as he says, he was unconsciously making it Catholic in theme, because that's how the story was unfolding, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, Tolkien was essentially undergoing in a more complex and much better way, because he's a better writer, the same sort of process that I was doing, where he was writing the story, thinking through what the story meant, realizing that it had these Catholic themes, and then the rewrites, he was strengthening what was coming through, right? So I think that that's why when you talk about like, oh, writers, you're not even thinking of the theme. Like, no, you are. And I think it's true too. Like, there's a misconception that like only really deep stories have themes and other stories don't, right? Like pulp stories don't, you
Right.
know, which is very wrong. Now that doesn't mean that the themes are expressed as they might not be the point of the story in the way that they are with something more literary, and I mean literary in an entirely neutral way, right? Like, I'm not saying this as a positive, as opposed to pulp, just literary as like a subgenre, right?
Right.
A more literary story might put the themes more front and center, but it is completely false to say that pulp stories don't have themes. Because again, if the theme is something that you're trying to say, something that you're an idea or concept that you're imbuing the work with, then by virtue of the fact that you have written something down to communicate it to the world, there is a theme there, right? You're communicating something. There is no, and if you don't intend to communicate something, then by virtue of the facts that you have conveyed to us, that communicates something. The facts you've chosen to give us, right? Or the fictional facts, that you have chosen to give us communicate something. So think of a story that is famous for not having a moral, and or at least among fans. I shouldn't say famous, but among fans, Nerdy Prudes Must Die, which you are a fan of, correct?
I am.
Yep, fun musical. I enjoyed it. Uh, it's pretty shallow though,
Yeah.
but with moments where like I consider it a missed opportunity more than anything else because there are moments that suggest that they could have said something interesting and they kind of just decided not to, right?
Yeah.
Uh, in particular though, like so. It's a joke among the fans that there's no real message or moral or meaning no larger theme, right? To
Right.
Nerdy Prudes Must Die. Uh, but I don't think this is funny to say, and it's true that like the theme and the moral is definitely something that I think they could have done more with, but I don't think it's true because even in by virtue of the fact that if you're saying that what happened resulted in no lesson, that in itself is a message, right?
Yes.
Like the message that you are presenting then is in the plot of Nerdy Prudes Must Die that the death of a popular person is actually not really that important,
Right.
right? Which is actually like a pretty significant thing to say if you think about it from that way, right? Like
Yeah.
what you are saying is that status and popularity are shallow, fleeting, and ultimately don't really matter. Uh, it's also very interesting. One thing that the story does very well is that his death kind of affects the school in surprising ways, right? Because in one hand, it's like everybody is happier that this dude who was a jerk, right?
Yes.
They're all happier that he's gone. But on the other hand, like when you start paying attention to what's actually going on in the school and the town, it's clear that he played a pretty important role in the school's ecosystem. That there's genuinely something lost in not having him there,
Yep.
right? Like the football team is a really good example of this. They're much nicer and they seem to be happier, right? And
Right.
enjoying themselves more, but they also lose, and you go
Yeah.
like, oh well, the town had too much of an emphasis on football. Well, right, okay, I guess you could say that, but the flip side of this is like you create a team to win. Like they're not
Yeah.
accomplishing the goal that they set out to accomplish, right? So that's one of the things that Nerdy Crews Must Die does very well, in my opinion.
And it's
Is that his death is not. Yeah, it's interesting. Go ahead.
yeah, his death is not just a random thing. It actually affects everyone around them. It's like he was a jerk, but he was also the captain of the football team. He was the head of the bullies. He bossed everyone around. But it's clear that almost everyone in the play is worse off once he's dead, even the people that killed him. Especially like the exception is like Richie, and Richie was murdered by the guy's ghost. I didn't like the song "Nerdy Fruits Must Die"
Somebody
is
made a whole
fantastic.
video on that. Somebody made a whole video on Richie's death that I haven't watched, but I might do it because
Yeah,
like they're going Richie's death is deeper than you think or something. I
yeah,
might show it to you if it's any good. But I
go for it.
haven't seen it, I'm afraid.
Yes,
So I
it's
haven't
also
told
been
you about it.
recommended to me. Uh,
Yeah.
but it's like to me it was already deeper, so I never watched it. So, but I probably should. But no, like except for Richie, who's accepted by the football team, it's implied that girls are starting to notice him. He's moving from Omega to Delta, of a sort of way, or kind of, I don't want to say Sigma like Sigma grind set, but he was, I don't think the mascot is just a normal Delta. Like you can't really be a mascot in a normal Delta. Uh, it requires too much personality, is what I'm trying to say.
Oh,
Uh,
I was gonna say I don't agree. I think you could be fine and like be the. Yeah, I get your point. Okay.
so it's like he had stuff going for him, and then he's killed by the ghost. But the rest of them, like the next captain of the football team, is the Bravo and is a clear Bravo because immediately the Alpha women start picking on him and sort of pushing him around. It's not a great relationship. There's a lot of status lost within the school. Like, sure, everyone can do whatever they want now because he's not calling the gay kids gay anymore. But at the same time, it's like they've lost a certain amount of law and order that was sort of kept by his presence, that pushed them not to, like, how do I want to put it, like, just fulfill their base desires, but rather, hey, we're going to win this team. You guys are going to practice, right? No, I was thinking of going out with Charlotte. And the relationship, this is the relationship that I think turns out pretty poorly for the Bravo. Oh, no, we're going to the team. We need to practice for the game. Yeah, all right, Max, we got to practice for the game. Bye. Stupid, talking to a girl like that, sort of thing. Like, there's a controlling aspect. He wasn't a good alpha, but there's a connection between, like, there's a whole lot there that is removed when they removed him. There's a certain element of nihilism to it. It doesn't have any meaning. It doesn't have any themes. Well, if it doesn't have any meaning or themes or whatever, why does every death affect everyone? There's no nihilism. It's not a nihilistic work. It's a nihilistic world with a nihilistic outlook, but it's pretty clear that part of Max's angst as a ghost is the fact that nobody prayed for him when he died, and he thinks that everyone else will have the same issue. Who's going to pray for Richie when he dies? He forces him to sing about it before he murders him. Like, there's something to it that's more than what they say. So they go in and they want to make the horny teenage drama that everyone kind of has a concept of, but is never done as platonically as Nerdy Prudes Must Die. And and these characters go through it, uh, and they get the revenge fantasy of killing the bully, and it doesn't make anything better. In fact, even ignoring the bully's ghost, who's improved by the situation besides Richie? Various characters are still locked in their sort of will they, won't be, they, flirting but not flirting situations. Like, it's like there's a logic to it, and you can say, well, it was on purpose, it wasn't on purpose, but there's a lot internal logic to the story that demands it rip itself out like a chest burster. It's
Yeah, you're right.
and that's the thing with it. Like, if you look at something like China Melville's Perdido Street Station, what's the theme? Well, one of the themes is about identity and bodily shape. And I don't mean it in the sort of woke SJW, whatever their buzzwords are these days,
Yeah,
way.
just keep in mind I have not read Perdido Street Station.
Oh, I'm aware. I enjoy China Melville's earlier work, and I think I might enjoy some of his later stuff, but I haven't kept up with him after Rail C. Uh, the story about the people, if they try to lie, reality changes to make it the truth, was just too weird for me. I didn't get it. But there's a certain.
It's a shame because that's an awesome concept.
I mean, it's a fantastic one. Like, Vox Day recommended it, but I don't know. It just got too weird for me. And that's like saying something's too spicy for like too spicy for Yog Sothoth. Like, Eldritch horror. I write horror. This is weird. But no, let me get back to what I was saying. So there's various characters who have different body shapes, to the point where they're almost separate species. There's a species of fly women who have fly heads but are otherwise beautiful, shapely women. The main villain, this gang boss, one of the main villains anyway, has this body that is never the same thing twice. Like, he's literally constantly morphing, and he wants the Fly Woman character to make him a statue of himself, just so he has a sense of personal identity. And it's implied that once the statue is finished, things will change. I can't really remember that plot line because all I'm thinking about is the weird vampire bat Soul Eater things. who have their own strange body shapes. The main character is implied to be fat, um, and not in a gross fat, but just like, could lose a few pounds kind of thing, thick bodied, uh, this sort of thing. Uh, it's, so like you have these ideas floating around. Well, what's it trying to say? Well, it's actually trying to say that your identity is connected to how your mind is used to affect the world around you. There's a reason why the mind eater, soul eater thing, vampire bat things, specifically, I think they're intellect eaters, if I'm recalling correctly. They ate a concept from the person, and I just can't remember it off the top of my head because it's been like half a decade since I read it. Um,
Hmm.
and they take these things from them. So there's concepts of personhood that are just being removed, being removed, being removed. Various characters are underclass or overclass based on who they are. There's different parts of the city. Like there's the crime boss. What is the meaning behind the crime boss always having a changing body? It doesn't mean that evil removes the ability of a person to self-reflect on their own reflection, or does it mean that evil causes one to mutate, to become something, whatever he was, he's not anymore. And he's so far gone that he can't be even, expressed in a cogent manner. The amount of like feet he has changes. Tentacles, spikes, spines, all these different things happen to this guy. And not painfully either, but they're just like a part of his ever shape changing person. Um, it's hard to, you can say, well, that's kind of difficult to look at, but there's actually very clear things that are happening inside the story that, you can point to and say these pieces are connected. Perdido Street Station is a very big and complex work. I do recommend it, though, if you can handle it, especially just a weird story like that. Things with Beowulf is like, what's the theme of Beowulf? Well, actually, it's just about heroism beating the monster and about old age and death. But this is going to sound crazy. Beowulf and Beowulf's mom and the dragon aren't actually concepts to accept as monsters to the people who are listening to them. Grendel is the monster from the swamps. Grendel's mom is the, sort of the wise monster from the swamps. The dragon is just an out of context problem brought on by somebody else that you have to solve. And I want to be clear, that doesn't change the fact that they're monsters. But to us who now from, 2000, 1,500 years later, we look at it and we can say, well, Grendel is like the pagan, or Grendel's mom is the witch, the poisoner, um, the mother of monsters in the sense of like mothers of evil men, mothers of monstrous men, who are more concerned with themselves than others, or the dragon is old age or greed and stuff like that. But in reality, the theme is not in the monsters per se. The theme is enhanced by the monsters. The theme is about man. Like the poem. I don't want to say theme all the time, especially for older works.
Yeah.
But like the poem describes Hrothgar taming the land. Well, the land rises up against him through Grendel, which they would have understood. And then the land has a source, which is Grendel's mother, and then the dragon is just evil, sort of like wickedness coming upon the land because of greed. Like it doesn't change the fact that it's a dragon. The primary purpose of it is the dragon. Everyone understood that the thief's greed was what caused the dragon to rise up. The prosperity caused people to be soft and corrupt. There's themes in there that people understood, but it didn't change the dragon from being the dragon. And I think people forget that. I think people think, oh, well, the dragon's greed. No, no, no. The dragon is a giant effing dragon. Pardon my language. No, no. The dragon is a dragon.
Hmm.
If you understand the dragon first and foremost as a dragon, you will understand what it's reinforcing. But it does not necessarily represent what his scene is about. It's similar with King Arthur's work. You can say there's themes of heroism and whatnot, but actually heroism is what the knights do. The theme is about miracles in the life of a man who's traveling through the world. The strength that he needs, the people he meets, traitor knights and good knights. The fact that no matter how good he is, he will always face trouble, but with Providence's help, you will be saved from it. Either by the strength of your arms or by the help of another. Like, there's more to King Arthur than just the chivalry. There's divine providence. But if you were to say, well, the theme of King Arthur is chivalry, you're not wrong. I'm just saying that there's like that's like the surface level reading. Things that are worth reading oftentimes have themes that dip deeper and deeper and deeper into the text of the story. At no point in the Nightland does it say that love has the power to redeem or protect against the Night Land as explicitly as I'm saying it. It's proven through the actions, no matter how cringe, of the characters.
Mm.
They're loving each other. She's teasing him. And then she does something naughty, so he spanks her, and then she kicks him with her bare feet for some reason. And he tickles her. Like, it's like, please. I don't want
Because
to.
the author had a foot fetish.
No. No, you don't say that. He was a normal Christian man. No, like
Amazing.
she's basically
Yeah.
naked and he's covered her in her cloak is what happens because her own city was destroyed because they became too spiritually weak to keep out Satan's forces, the evil forces of the Nightland. So it's less weird. Like they're like in context, they're being
I mean,
lovey
it's
dovey
pretty
with
weird.
each other. It's weird. Like the like so there's a concept that like you can write something to be too intimate and like
Yes.
so like if I were to write, my family's a very cold family. We don't really hug that much. We don't really kissy. We don't all kinds of things like that. Whatever you imagine a really touchy family to do, we just don't do. You know, my parents slept in separate beds, unironically. Like there's not that I'm saying it was like that, but like, I met my mom for the first time in like a couple weeks. We just kind of hugged a little bit and then went about our stuff. Like, oh, hey, how you doing? Like that sort of thing, right? Okay, so if you take
Hmm.
that and you describe it to somebody and put it in a book, you would say, oh, that's a very cold family. There must be a lot of tension. There's some tension, but it's like, you would look at it and you say, this is a theme of the story. But the problem is, if you were to push it to the other end and you have like adult men and their mothers arm in arm sleeping in the same bed, not sexually, but like, like this weird kind of intimacy, where like there's no like privacy between them. There's no, things that we would consider healthy for a relationship of two separate individuals to have. You would call that too connected, and you would say that there's themes of incest here, even if there wasn't any actual incest. Like there's a video of um, like these sons going to the big game and they slap their mom's butt. And it's like, but why are you doing that? This is weird. Is this just performative for TikTok for like some sort of weird white people own or something like that? No, this is too intimate. I didn't like seeing it. But I've seen similar things in families who just don't think like the butt is particularly sexual. So they just slap ass all the time. Like it's there's no way to describe it, Anthony. I'm sorry.
So Ben, how does this connect to theme again?
I was talking about the Nightland, okay? It's just I hate the internet.
Amazing.
I hate the internet. The point is that like if you were to put this in front of me in like a Pinkerton's Ghost story or just a short story in general, I would consider this way too intimate. I would consider it something that would interfere with whatever you're trying to say. Well, I'm trying to show that these people love each other. Okay, well, dial it back a notch. All right? Like
Yeah.
we get it. All right? like if I'm reading a like Anthony, I can't remember what's public with you or not.
Well, I don't know. Since I don't know what you're debating on saying, don't say it.
Yeah. So like, let's say you have somebody with like, let's say you get somebody reading somebody's work, right? And it's like they're married and they describe something only a married man would know about his wife. I don't
Yeah.
need to know that. I absolutely do not need to know that. But Ben, it's a natural part of life. No, it's too much. It doesn't do anything for anybody except titillate for the freaks in the audience. You can't have sexual mores, intimacy, um, these sort of things as a theme and still have it not dip into things like pornography. The reason why the Nightland stays away from it is that actually their their interactions with each other are not sexual. Like even though I describe something that like a foot fetish would enjoy, frankly it's 1910 or whatever it is. It's a different society. They don't have the internet back then, you freaks. Uh,
Yeah, let's put it another way too. Like, since you mentioned you weren't sure what's public or not with me, I'll share. Like, there are certain conversations I have had with my fiance that I would literally rather I would go to my grave before any other person in the world learned what we were talking about.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You should. Anyway,
Anyway, yes, but you get what I'm saying here, where there is a frankness of character interactions that actually start interfering with and hindering the theme that a writer may be going for. So, like in Perdido Street Station, various characters are in a sexual relationship. That doesn't actually interfere too much with the theme. It in fact encourages it because it's about differences in body shape and how it affects your worldview and how it affects your soul. So it actually has a certain amount of pertinence to the story, just like the acts of flirting, we'll say, between platonic flirting in the Nightland is between the hero and what's her name. There's
Murder
other
That's Beautiful.
Murdath the Beautiful. Thank you so much. Um, so there's uses for it, but people like when you write something, even though the author's intent always matters, and it will come out in the story itself, the person reading it will not have a perfect knowledge of what the author intends for the theming of the book, whether intentional or whether sprung out of the ground, fully formed like a myrmidon. Like I said earlier, the monsters in Beowulf are still just monsters. Hmm.
Yep. Yeah, no, I fully agree with this because I guess part of the point that I was getting at is that I think the problem with the modern literary world is that and I'm talking about like the modernist authors and
Mm-hmm.
like bad writing advice you'll get from creative writing teachers, putting your theme first in like foremost is a bad idea generally, right?
Yes.
Like, I think that's really what the issue is. And then sometimes people misinterpret it as like, you shouldn't have a theme or you shouldn't right? Like, which isn't true either.
Right.
But is a reaction to this sort of thing. Because a lot of the writing advice that you get is like, okay, so what's the themes here? And the themes make the story good, which isn't true. And is probably not the way you should approach your story when writing it either, right? Like, going back to Achilles complex. Like, again, I did not write the story with the theme foremost. I wrote the story with a horror concept foremost.
Yes.
Or you go to a story like I'm trying to think like Conan the Barbarian. Uh, So we've talked about on stream, I think as recently as last week, but Queen of the Black Coast is the best Conan the Barbarian story, at least in my opinion. Uh, I understand that Robert E. Howard was an excellent writer and has many, many great stories. So I don't mean this to be an objective claim, but I think it is. In fact, I would consider Queen of the Black Coast to be one of the best short stories of the 20th century because, like I said last week, so I'm not going to make the argument now, Queen of the Black Coast effectively functions as a critique of the entire Conan worldview. Uh, I don't know if it's the only Conan story that does that because I haven't read all of them, but certainly it's one of the most striking, right? That Conan in this story has a certain point of view that is challenged and ultimately defeated by the end of it. Oh no, rain, Ben. The rain is getting louder.
It is. It's okay. I still love you. Keep going.
Gotcha. Aw. Anyway, um, um, the point though is that in Conan, if you were to ask somebody what is the theme of a typical Conan story, there is in fact a very strong theme. The theme is that of romanticization of the barbarian over civilization, right?
Hmm.
And you get a little hint of this at the beginning of Queen of the Black Coast, for example. So Conan is dragged to a jail cell because he is dragged to a trial, I should say, courtroom, right? Because there is a bar fight and he refuses to give up his friend who I think either killed or injured somebody in the fight. I can't remember exactly. So Conan is dragged to the courtroom and he refuses to give up his friend in the fight. And Conan is sentenced for this and is going to be like, I don't know, maybe jailed, maybe executed. But Conan don't have time for that shit, so he just escapes. Uh, as you do if you're an incredibly super strong barbarian future king. So,
Hmm.
right. So this is a very clear idea expression of the normal theme of a Conan story, right? Because you have the civilized world with its trials, but doesn't understand something as simple and primitive and basic, but desirable as honor and friendship, right? You know, Conan believes that the men who will try him must be mad because they do not understand the basic duty to not give up your friends, right? To
Mm-hmm.
armed men. You know, so this is normally what Howard is doing in the Conan stories. But if you were to ask Howard, like, why, like, what is a Conan the Barbarian story about? I mean, he might say something like that, but I think more likely just going, and this is me extrapolating from all of the writers I know, he would say, well, it's about a barbarian who goes on adventures. You know,
Right.
like, and then the themes kind of naturally arise from the way he's writing the story. So I guess what I'm saying too is that I think Queen of the Black Coast gives you an example of what you can do with like evolution of a theme. Because there is a sense where like, no, you don't need to do anything particularly interesting with the theme. You could just present it, right? This is what most Conan stories do. Uh,
Yes.
but you can do interesting things with a theme when you have ideas that are expressed in the story that are challenged and fought against.
Hmm.
One thing that happened, someone who does this extremely well in a very interesting way is Daniel Handler's Fashion Enemy Snicket, right? So one way that you could read the entire series of unfortunate events is that every book is about some form of institution in society failing them, failing the three children, right, of who are the protagonists of the series, one after the other. It starts with like their relatives fail, or it should be the legal system fails. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
because book one is about a loophole in a will gets them sent to Count Olaf, right?
The
And then Justice
closest
Strauss,
relative.
yes, and then Justice Strauss refuses to help them at the end, right?
Yes.
So it's about the failure of the legal system, then the failure of the of science because Uncle Monty is a reptile scientist. I forget the name, herpetologist, hepatologist. Uh,
Herpetologist.
he's a herpetologist. Thank you. Uncle Monty is a herpetologist, so it's the failure of the scientific institutions. And then you have like the failure of, I guess, Aunt Josephine would be like extended relatives or something,
Yeah, but
or
also just like
I'm
living in fear, that sort of thing.
yeah, and of extreme caution, I suppose.
Yes.
Then you have the failure of industry, which is the miserable male, failure of the school system, failure of high society, ersatz elevate. So school system's austere academy, high society is ersatz elevator.
Mm-hmm.
The vile village is failure of community, right?
Yes.
Uh, Literally the entire like the point of that book is like it takes a village to raise a child, so the village literally tries to raise them, but they're all horrible. Uh, you have the failure of the medical system in the hostile hospital, the failure of the entertainment industry in the carnivorous carnival, and then you get in the slippery slope. It becomes a little bit more difficult, but something like the failure. You eventually have like the failure of VFD at some point because they like try and go all in, and like in the last three books with VFD, and VFD ultimately fails them. Their friends betray them. So Fiona, particularly, I'm thinking in the Grim Grotto,
Yes.
uh, ends up betrays them. Uh, and then finally, in the last book, they put their faith in education. Like literally, it's about like God, kind of fails them. But then they say, okay, well, we're going to put all our faith in education, right? But the interesting thing about a series of unfortunate events and what saves it from being typical atheist, schlock, right? Like, oh, God fails them, but education will save them, is that the final twist of the knife that Count Olaf gives is education won't save them either.
Yes.
Because Count Olaf's final lines, which are haunting and one of the best things in the series, by the way, are literally him going, "You're not the only one who can quote, who knows the words of our associates." Then he quotes a poem, uh, which, by the way, is a hilarious fuck you.
Would you
It's
believe that my aunt actually quoted the like helped quoted
Philip
the
Larkin.
poem?
This be the verse.
Yes.
That's such an awful poem. What?
Ooh.
It's such a great. I have to like after I read the poem, I'm like I really got to compliment Daniel Handler on his choice of poetry for Count Olaf, because
Yes.
this dude is a piece. Like, because first off, Philip Larkin is an absolute piece of shit, and that poem is a truly vile poem, and it is exactly the sort of poem that Count Olaf would quote to a pregnant woman while he dies, just to torment three small children.
Oh right,
It's
yes, I
amazing.
forgot about that. The tormenting of the three small children.
Yes. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can and never have any kids yourself. And then he dies like a Chad. Incredible
Amazing.
death scene.
It is.
Uh,
It's true.
Unironically, like I'm not a huge fan of the end. I had issues with it at the time. I've kind of warmed up to it later, but not really. Like
Mm.
I still am kind of meh on it. But Count Olaf's death scene almost like salvages the entire book.
Yes.
Um, it's incredible. But yeah, anyway, I'm sorry, I got off topic because I wanted to talk about the fact that how great this be the verse was as a choice for Count Olaf.
That's a
But
great
anyway,
choice.
the point is the 13th book in the series is ultimately about like both the failure of God and religion, which is okay, but also the failure of education,
Mm-hmm.
which means that the Baudelaires in the end of the story are left with nothing.
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 Each other,
So,
kind
what
of.
is the message? What of a series of unfortunate events? I think the only thing you could really come out with is the best answer is that there is no easy answer. There's nothing that's going to come and save you. The best that we can do is our best. And sometimes that isn't going to be enough. But if
Yes.
nobody tries, then the world is inevitably going to turn into, be filled with people like Count Olaf,
Yes.
right?
Who quotes that
So,
horrible poet?
yes. and Philip Larkin, right?
Yes.
People like Count Olaf and Philip Larkin. Like so. I don't think a series of unfortunate events is nihilistic. I did think that at one time, by the way. I've changed
It's
my
easy to
opinion
think.
after rereading it. What was that?
It's easy to think that, frankly.
Yeah, I was incorrect. Though, like I misread the series.
Hmm.
Like I don't think that's what he's saying because I don't think he's saying that there's no point, don't try. I think what he's saying is that I don't have. I think he's just admitting that he doesn't have the answer, right?
Right.
Like, which is not the same as saying that there is no answer or there is no reason to try.
Right. Because it's
Uh,
like hold on. This is actually a good point. Like this comes up quite a bit theme wise. Whether or not an author has an answer to life, the universe, and everything. You know, something stupid like you have to know the question first. That's dumb. I'm literally
right. This
asking
is
the
why,
question
like,
right now.
now that's a nihilistic series, but it
Yes.
works as I mentioned with our interview with John. The reason that that series works and it's extremely funny, and the reason that it works as well as it does is the fact that it's a comedy, right?
Yes.
Like it could only ever be a horror or comedy. There's no other place you could go with it. Uh, but it's also why nobody really likes the last book as much as the others, Mostly Harmless. I
Hmm.
loved it when I first read it. I thought it was one of the better books, actually, in the series. And I was like, I don't really, and I get why people don't like it because of the ending, right? Where literally everyone dies except Zaphod, who
I've
is not
never
there. But
I never read it, so
I actually do unironically recommend it. And then you learn, like, at the beginning of the book, you learn that there is a planet of aliens who do nothing but watch Earth on giant TV screens. And when asked why, they just say that that's their job and that, like, this is what they do. And then the last page of the book is that they cut to the aliens and all versions of Earth and all different dimensions on all of their TV screens start blinking out. And then the aliens change the channel. The end.
oh,
Uh, so you could see why fans didn't like it. But I read it and I was like, well, this was always where it was going to go, though, right? Like,
yeah.
where else? What else was there? I don't know why you're all so upset.
Well, I think the average reader, and I want to be clear, the average reader, uh, doesn't actually want there to be nihilism in their story. Like,
No, oh no, you're absolutely like I do get why on the intellectual level, right? Like nobody
yes,
wants all of their favorite characters to die in front of them, right? Um, it's just not fun. But the flip side is like this was where the story was always going to go. So
yes.
I was kind of like, well, yeah, that's how it ends. You
It
know,
it
that's
only
always
had
how.
that ending.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty funny because Douglas Adams technically ends the story right before he shows them all dying, and Zaphod is still out there. So he mentions later he had always intended on writing a sequel, and they asked him like, but didn't you just like kill everyone and destroy all versions of Earth in all alternate dimensions? And the Douglas Adams responded, actually, this just makes it easier because everyone's all in the same place at least, which is pretty funny. Uh,
Yes.
and then Owen Colfer wrote a sequel to it that was awful, uh, like truly wretched. Like unreadably bad. Uh, it was a shame. I'm a big Owen Colfer fan, but Owen Colfer is not Douglas Adams. You cannot imitate Douglas Adams. Douglas Adams is an original.
Hmm.
But the point is, like, that's an example of a nihilistic story, right? Like, it
Yes.
was a story that really had no point. It asked some interesting questions, it made you laugh, and then it was gone. Uh, Now you cut to a story like a series of unfortunate events, and don't get me wrong, I don't agree with the message of a series of unfortunate events either, for that matter, right? Like, in
Right.
the end, I do think that there is an answer. That the answer can be found in Jesus Christ.
Yes.
It can be found in the one true God and the meaning that He gives to life. But just because I don't agree with it doesn't mean that his answer was nihilistic. I
Right.
think that there's, if anything, some humility there, right? Because what he's doing is admitting that none of the answers that he knows of work,
There's
right?
no sacred
Like,
cow he can point to. In the end, Count Olaf was just as educated as the rest. Like you thought
right.
education was,
Essentially, yeah,
yeah, because like there is a big theme of education having a power to at least make your life better. Uncle Monty was a herpetologist.
hmm
Uh,
but that's
uh,
exactly the point of the ending of saying that
mm-hmm.
even that isn't inevitable, right?
Yes.
Even that's not. He's essentially pointing to, like, all right, so we've got the religious people down, and now you can laugh at them, except not so fast, right? Because we're really not doing any better. Is kind
Right.
of what is how I would grasp it. And then in his prequel series, which I consider to be even better, like a borderline masterpiece, All the Wrong Questions. I
Right.
consider the last book of All the Wrong Questions, which is called Why Is This Night Different from All Other Nights, is one of the best children's books probably ever written, when you just in the category of children's books. Uh, and All the Wrong Questions kind of hammers this home even more, because Lemony Snicket is very smart, right? And
Yes.
All the Wrong Questions is entirely about how the perspective that you're viewing a situation from completely changes, right? How you do it, how that situation will work for you. Like, one of the great things, this is what I mean. One of the great things about All the Wrong Questions, the first chapter of the first book is a perfect first chapter. Lemony Snicket is sitting at a restaurant with a man and a woman who are calling him son, and he's referring to them as mom, dad, and they're chatting about him going off to school. Lemony, in the middle of the conversation, gets up, leaves through the window, and then finds his mentor of the bathroom, right? And then finds his mentor, S.
Hmm.
Theodora Markson, who asks him if he's going to even say goodbye to his parents. And the chapter ends with Lemony saying, "Those weren't my parents." Uh, Great first chapter, excellent,
That
because it
is pretty good.
entirely gets at, like, the whole point of the book is that you're asking the wrong questions, right? You're
Right.
reading this chapter and you're going, what's going on? Why is he acting like this? When what you actually should be asking is, who are these people, right?
Right.
And that's the point of the book. Lemony is saying that one thing that people point out, Lemony keeps saying that he's wrong in every book of the series. He goes, I was wrong about all of it, but he's not wrong about all of it, right? In the
Right.
sense that Lemony always answers the questions that he asks, right? But he's
Yes.
asking the wrong questions. So in the final book of the series, the whole thing is that there's this villain named Hangfire who wants to summon. This is, by the way, the plot's insane.
That's a fantastic name, by
Much
the
more.
way. Hangfire. Ooh.
Oh, it's so. He gives an incredible villain speech in the last book that, like, I think I quoted in my review on the Castalia blog in full. It's amazing. But Hangfire, who is this villain, he wants to summon a sea monster called the Bombinating Beast by using, like, a special flute, and they might be breeding it in the town. Um, and the whole thing, it's a train. It's a book that takes place on a train, and specifically, the train is going through an area that is in between two different places, meaning that there are no laws. By the way, there are parts of the U.S. that are like this,
Yep.
generally in the middle states, in the middle of national parks and things. And
Yep.
normally, if you kill someone there, you're still probably going to be prosecuted. They'll just have to argue for a little bit longer about who gets you. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Well, it's like
uh,
there's a reason why the motorcycle rally is in Sturgis. Just saying.
mm, yep, you're not wrong. So yes, there are places in the United States that are, like, in between jurisdictions, and technically there are no laws. So he uses this concept of, like, the train is going through this area, so now it's lawless. Well, fast forward to the end of the book, and at the end of the book, Hangfire has summoned the Abominating Beast, uh, and Lemony manages to steal the flute from Hangfire that is used to control the Abominating Beast. And now Lemony has a choice of what he can do, right? Hangfire has all but one. He has summoned the monster. The train is about to is probably going to derail. He could enact his evil scheme, whatever it is. So Lemony shoves Hangfire into the jaws of the Abominating Beast. He murders him,
Yes.
right?
Well,
This is
I would make an argument
you could.
against the.
Oh, no, you can make an argument that's not murder. You're right.
Yeah.
But the
'Cause-
flip side is like, who is Hangfire?
Yes.
Right? We actually don't know at this point, except that Lemony. The reveal at the end is Lemony does know. Hangfire is the father of his love interest, whose name, by the way, is also incredible. It is Ellington Faint. What a great femme fatale name! I love
That is
it.
a pretty good femme fatale name.
But once again, it's like you're reading this from the wrong perspective. What you're supposed to get by the ending is that Lemony sees himself as a noir hero bringing justice to a corrupt town, when in reality, you have this girl, and this girl is a femme fatale. But they said, if you think about it, though, you never know her real motives or whose side she's on. They said, but that's not actually true if you reread the series. Ellington Faint's motives are always very clear. She is always on the side of who she perceives to be her father. She thinks her father has been kidnapped by Hangfire. She doesn't know that he's actually Hangfire. But anytime you're wondering what will Ellington do, the answer is always really obvious. It's she's going to do something to help her father. Right? Yep. Like, that's the answer. So in
that's
that
a pretty good motivation.
It's a great motivation, yeah. And it's really interesting because Lemony is viewing her and acting like throughout the series that she's some sort of femme fatale, right? Like with mysterious motives, because that's what he wants, right? Like in his story, that makes her more interesting, But in reality, she's just a scared little girl who is trying to make sure her father doesn't get killed. And now Lemony just killed him in front of her, right? So nobody's happy with him. And then Lemony learns, so there's the whole series, he's on the outs with VFD. And Lemony is like, because his sister has been captured and was trying to steal something from a museum and was captured, and he thinks they're not telling him things. So he's going to lead a revolution. And he is shocked to find in the last car of the train, his sister is in the last train car, meaning that there was a larger plan he didn't know about. And Lemony has no excuse not to have assumed this, because this entire book, he tells all of the people working with him that it's going to be a fragmentary plot where not everybody knows everything that's going on in order to keep the plan safer. There is a good reason for it. So he knows about the concept of fragmentary plots. He knows why he might not be privy to all of the information. He just didn't want to accept it, right?
Right.
He didn't want to accept that he wasn't getting this information. So he acts as if he's going to play Lone Ranger, and he derails the train and ruins everyone's plans, right? Not even knowing what the larger plan was, because they didn't tell him. Because he's not that important in the end, right? He's just not a very important person. So he does all of this and go, well, I made the town better, right? And everyone's like, well, you murdered this girl's father, right? Like, and honestly, it's kind of unclear. Like, he probably had a point in some things,
I mean,
like,
he was summoning an abominable, yes.
The town was corrupt, like,
Anthony, he was summoning an eldritch horror.
And there's also the fact, well, it was a sea monster.
Fine.
But there's also the fact, too, that, like, what if VFD already knew about all of this, right? And yes. Lemony just derailed the plans that VFD had to handle this. We have no idea, because Lemony didn't assume that they had no idea what they were doing. That's the point of the book. And you see how this feeds into the themes of a series of unfortunate events of, right? I don't know what the answer is. Because Lemony in the series is acting like he knows all the answers, and it goes disastrously wrong, right?
Yes.
That's the entire point of the series. I highly recommend it. It is a great series, has some really, really interesting moments in it. they're all worth reading. Like they're all pretty short. It's basically the length of like one novel, I would say, the series as a whole, because they're all like, children's level chapter books. Uh, and they're really interestingly done. But yeah, you can see here, like, was this a story that was written with a theme first? Is the interesting question. Well, obviously, the only way you'd be able to answer that is if you asked Daniel Handler, right?
Yes.
And he would tell you. But if you were to ask me, and
No, he'd
if
say
I had a
you're asking
guess,
the wrong questions, and he'd wink at you, and then like disappear into the bookshelves.
he would. Um, Also, he would have a point, to be honest with
Yes.
you, uh, because that is kind of the wrong question, right? Like, because books are integrated wholes.
Yep.
That's kind of where I've been going with this the whole time. To say, did he go the theme first? Well, first off, noir is a great fit for the world of a series of unfortunate events,
Yes.
right? Like, that is a very natural progression of the story. Uh, so that's one way to think of it. Another way to think of it is like, well, what else was the story going to be about? The whole point of the story from the beginning is to make it clear that you're not as smart as you think you are, right? You, the reader, and you, Lemony, uh, are not as intelligent as you think you are.
Yes. And that's
And that's
actually
kind of.
I kind of like
Go
that.
ahead.
I kind of like that as a theme. That's a pretty good theme.
Yeah, and it's a great theme for a mystery, which is all about like fooling the reader, right? But All the Wrong Questions does this in a way like there is a sense in which Why Is This Night Different from All Other Nights doesn't play fair, but on purpose, right?
Right.
Like, what I mean is you can't figure out the full story, but that's the entire point, right? They've been telling you this all along. They've been very upfront about it. Hey, like every single book, VFD is contacting Lemony and telling him, man, you don't have the full story. Stop what you're doing, right? Like things are going on that you don't understand. Play your role. And Lemony is ignoring them. So finally, in the last book, it finally hits him when he sees that, oh, wait, Kit's not actually in prison at all. Kit is on this train with me in hiding. They broke her out, right? Like,
Right.
I don't have the full story, like, at all. And also, it's just this general idea that Lemony sees himself as something that he really isn't, right? He sees himself as, like what's his face? The guy in The Big Sleep, Philip Marlowe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Philip Marlowe, who's like the only man with morals in a corrupt world, when that's not what he is at all, right? Like that's not what's going on at all. That's not what's happening here. It's what he wishes was happening. It's how he perceives himself in this moment. But to be fair to Lemony, older Lemony as a narrator is very critical of himself and always has been. He is in a series of unfortunate events as well.
Yes.
He is nothing if not. Lemony is probably either a highly romantic low delta, or possibly a gamma. Honestly,
Yeah.
like he has a little bit of that vibe. He definitely. It's interesting because, like, especially in All the Wrong Questions, when he's the protagonist, he does, and he's very young, so it's kind of hard to pin down. And the books are very they're PG. Like,
Mhm.
there's no real romance in it. But he does kind of have a thing with the ladies in it. Like, women are interested in him, like Ellington, and then there's another character named Moxie,
Yes.
who both are kind of interested in him in the sort of PG way of a children's chapter book. Um, and then he does end up getting Beatrice, but then Beatrice leaves him for Bertrand, and then he pines after her, which is what makes me think he's either a low delta or gamma. Uh, Honestly, he's probably more likely to be a gamma than anything
I was
because
about to
he
say.
writes.
Yeah.
As I'm thinking it over, I mean the one good quality you could say about Lemony is that he is, if nothing else, brutally self-reflective and honest about his own shortcomings. he will very openly refer to himself as a coward or a fool. Uh, he is not afraid to call himself out for his own bullshit. Uh, but the long like love poems and moaning and whining that he does makes me think like
Well,
it's a little gamma.
the biggest thing is that when people are telling him, "Hey, you don't know what's going on," he completely ignores them and thinks he has what it takes.
Right. There's also a little bit like, and to be fair, as Vox Day would point out, it's almost a category error to categorize children on the hierarchy. But in this case, we're talking about a character in a book. So I'm not categorizing him as like what he necessarily ends up as. I'm thinking of like, this is the character as presented, right?
Right.
Like, this is who we currently see him as. You know, just like Eustace ends up as, I don't know, probably a Delta.
Bravo.
Like, yeah, maybe Bravo. Yeah.
Oh no, like
Uh,
he's all about like law and order and justice and stuff like that. Like that's I don't know.
that's true. He does kind of start to admire the knightly ideal, right? Like as
Yes.
time goes on. So yeah, and, uh, but Eustace is very, very clearly one of the most like the example of the gamma at the beginning of the book, but that clearly is not what he ends up being. Yeah, and the reason that he gets broken out of this is through essentially brutal self-honesty, right? In a way
Right.
that he cannot possibly avoid. He is literally transformed into a dragon because of his greed. He is reminded of this fact
Oh, you
every
said
day of his life.
Eustace. For some reason, I thought Edmund. Yeah, no, you're right.
No, no. Edmund too, though. For that matter, you're right. Edmund definitely is a Bravo. Uh, very clear Bravo. Bravo that has still like he does need to sometimes be reminded like snap out of his gamma traits, but
Yes.
uh very clear Bravo. Eustace, I said like he does admire the knightly ideal, so
Yes.
I think more Delta, I guess, but it's kind of hard to say. Whatever. What I was saying with Eustace, like he is like the gamma, right? Like he is every quality of a gamma Eustace, and what snaps Eustace out of this is like a brutal self honesty.
Mm.
So he is transformed into a dragon, and he is a dragon, and he cannot hide away from this fact. He cannot avoid it. He is confronted with it for every moment of his life. And he is confronted with the fact that the people who he resented are showing him kindness and empathy. Uh, so these two things like are the things that really force the change. Now, in Edmund's case, Edmund is shocked out of it. Again, part of it is because he's a child, but he's shocked out of it almost by like shame, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like he is brutally humbled by his betrayal and by what happened, and is ashamed of it, and he reacts to it in the proper way instead of, you know, I'm trying to think of the word. Instead of like hiding away from it, Edmund chooses to rise up, right?
Right.
And he chooses to attempt to redeem himself and grow as a person. And then yes, he becomes King Edmund the Just, so he becomes very concerned with upholding law and order. He is a very clear Bravo.
Mm-hmm.
But as we see in the in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, when he is paired up with the clear, I think Caspian would be an alpha. Uh, I'm thinking it over. Yeah, I would say so.
Right, but it's
Uh,
the how do I want to put it? Like what we're getting at here overall is that how characters are designed are they are directly connected uh, to the themes and enhance the themes rather than take them away or fight with the themes, if that makes sense.
yeah, that's where I'm going with this, and part of it is that's going to be driven by your characters. Now, Narnia is an interesting example because it's such an allegorical story. At least the first one is. Believe it or not, the stories actually get less so as they go on.
Yes.
Until you reach the last battle, which is, and I should say, 4, 5, 6. Sorry, I'm thinking 4, 5, 6. I'm thinking of their original, their chronological order. And I always read them in publication order, but I think of them in chronological order. So let me do it. Caspian, Dawn Treader, Silver Chair, and The Horse and His Boy are really not very allegorical, right? Like,
Right.
I mean, Caspian has some elements of it. It's like, oh, a remnant that's rising up, right? Like, to retake the whole. But overall, I would say not very much. Uh, Magician's Nephew, on the other hand, is a straight retelling of Genesis. And The Last Battle is the children's version of Revelation. It's one of the reasons I think that The Last Battle is the best book in the series. Uh, because he took the most confusing and least accessible book of the entire Bible and wrote it for children. It's like it's kind of a wild achievement. But yeah, like there is a large chunk of the Narnia series that isn't allegorical, but the first book especially, like, it's really interesting because when you go in this conversation of themes versus character, since they were all supposed to represent such specific things, almost in a Pilgrim's Progress like way, but not quite, as you mentioned. In this case, I could absolutely imagine him working theme first, right?
Yes.
Like, it is hard for me to think of him coming up with the Chronicles of Narnia and going, well, what if these kids found a magical world? Like, I mean, that's possible, but I don't think that. I think it was more likely that he was going, well, what would, Jesus is going to, what if Jesus came in a fantasy world, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then let's present it in a way that's accessible for children. And that's how we came up with Chronicles of Narnia. Uh, I think that they're brilliant in their own way, but one of the reasons that they're brilliant is that Lewis was a tremendous writer of characters, right?
Yes.
So Lewis, even in the midst of these archetypes, is able to make his characters seem incredibly real and realistic. Uh, they act in such vividly understandable ways, right?
Yes.
You can easily imagine all of them as people who really exist. Uh, and that's, I think, a skill that not a lot of authors who try to do that sort of thing are going to have. In fact, you can even think of Pilgrim's Progress as an example of someone who doesn't bother really with that shit.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's like it's
now,
entirely unnecessary and not what Pilgrim's Progress was about anyway.
no, Pilgrim's Progress, honestly, to even call it fiction is kind of straining definitions,
It is
right?
literally the
Like,
Christian life in different in the different modes that a Christian may take until death.
yeah, and don't get me wrong, I have a certain respect for Pilgrim's Progress and what it's trying to do. I don't have any particular animus towards it, except for the fact that I'm pretty sure that the author really hated Catholics.
He
But,
did.
that was par for the course at the time. Uh,
It
like,
was the
I'm not going to waste
style at
time.
the time.
Yeah, I'm not going to waste time being offended by it. Like, I have nothing against Pilgrim's Progress as a book. Nevertheless, it's like,
Quite
even to call
frankly,
it.
quite frankly, it's like I'm pretty okay with you being Catholic, Anthony. But the
Aw.
see that this is ecumenism this is the only form of ecumenism, loving on your Christian brother. Uh, but there's like to me, there's always a difference between like Catholicism and papism. Like it's like people say papism anytime Catholic raises their head in Protestant circles, but in reality, it's like the thing if you've watched our streams of Protestant versus Catholic, it's the thing that I bring up
Yeah.
time and time again. There's a difference between the theologian level stuff work, which is usually pretty decent, even if I disagree with certain aspects, and what the common man understands and what the politically motivated class of the Catholic Church does. Like it's that if you
Mm.
were to look at, like, if you were to study Pilgrim's Progress and like see, okay, what parts of the book actually apply to, like, say, Catholicism, in reality it's about worldly Catholicism, Cesaro-Papism, whatever you want to call it. It's the separation of Catholicism from the mission of God to spread the gospel to the whole
Yeah,
world.
I mean, I would say too, like, if you want to go, is there anything in the book that would be strictly incompatible with Catholicism? I can think of one thing off the top of my head, and this is something that I got from a writer named Joseph Moore. Joseph Moore's like, if you know him, he has a blog called Yard Sales Online. He actually has a lot of really great stuff on education and the
Mm.
modern education system. So I recommend you look up his blog. But anyway, he mentioned this about Pilgrim's
Hmm.
Progress. He said, like, what would a Catholic version look like? And he goes, well, it would look like Dante's Inferno, right? Which is
Yes.
essentially just a more complicated version of the same idea.
Yep.
Uh, and he's absolutely right, by the way, and that's an interesting thing to say. But he goes, like, the one thing he would say, he mentioned that, like, would be different is that I'm trying to remember. It's been such a long time since I've looked at it, but I think at the end of the story, like, they get to the edge of the mountain, and then the ignorant person is dragged off to hell, basically,
Mm.
like, because he's been misled by ignorance.
Yes.
Uh, and he said, like, in the Catholic understanding of it, then this person would perhaps get dragged off to, like, the mountains of purgatory, where he since he was not, it was not malicious but only ignorant, so he would start at the bottom of the mountain and learn on the climb, something like that. Uh,
Yes.
which is an interesting thought. I don't really know because I don't know enough about Pilgrim's Progress. Say if he's right. Uh, but it makes some sense to me. Like, it would be like, ignorant. Like, we would say that ignorance wouldn't send you. Ignorance of the gospel wouldn't be enough to send you to hell. You need to actively reject God,
Yes.
right? And you
I
can
I
do
would.
that with actively.
Mm.
Go ahead.
And I would say, like, from their perspective, they would say that ignorance of God is hatred of God because you're not willing to seek out God.
That's possible. Yeah, and there is something to that for sure. So, like, when you really get into it, then you get into the two modes of ignorance, which is vincible versus invincible. Invincible being it's literally not your fault. This would be the example, like, uh, the Indian tribes before the arrival of Columbus, right?
Right.
Uh, so that's not to say that they were all saved. I'm saying no such thing. In fact, I think that that's incredibly, incredibly unlikely. Um, so unlikely. What I am saying is you cannot hold them to blame for, like, rejecting the gospel. You know, they literally do not know what it is. Now you
Yes.
can hold them to blame, and this is why I go, like, I'm not saying that they are all saved. I am saying no such thing. You can hold them to blame for rejecting what of God has been revealed to them, and Paul makes it very clear that there's no excuses here,
Yes.
right? The natural world makes the glory of God clear to all. This isn't a quote. I'm paraphrasing, right?
Yes.
Uh, like, the natural world will make the glory of God clear to all, and anyone is culpable who rejects that, right? Nevertheless, you just cannot say, like, oh, well, they're not going to church every Sunday. Like, they don't know what church is or why you would go on a Sunday or anything of what's going on overseas. So that particular thing, they are invincibly ignorant. Now, vincible ignorance is when you can know something or you should know something, but you either choose not to investigate further, or you, like, are blinding yourself in some way, right? Like, you
Right.
really know better, you know. Um, and distinguishing between the two is impossible if you're really, like, you can make an educated guess, but if you're not in the situation, it's pretty much impossible for any one person. right? Like, what I mean by that is, for example, somebody is out there and they are not going to church. Are they invincibly or vincibly ignorant? Now, in Western society, you might go, well, clearly they must be vincibly ignorant, right? Because they've surely heard the news of Jesus Christ. Well, maybe, maybe not, right? Like, they might have. Did they hear it in a way that was uh, that actually explained it in a way that made sense and was proper, like, or was it something that obviously nobody would ever really believe, right?
Right.
Because it's just clearly false. Now, am I saying that they're definitely invincibly ignorant? Again, no, I'm certainly not saying that. uh, I'm just saying that that's probably something that you're not really that sort of level of culpability is something you're not really going to know. This is now just like a random theological tangent based off Pilgrim's Progress, but
No,
yeah,
this is
it's an
connected to the
interesting.
themes because
Yeah, it's an interesting topic.
like even though Pilgrim's Progress is just literally allegory for the Christian life, the theme is the Christian life. How does one go through life, and how does one comport yourself in various events? You know, he's mentored. He comes to the cross. You know, his sin to him is like a burden. You know, but it is removed. But he still has to face the fires of the world, of abandoning himself. You know, these things, may be literally given to you, but it's no different than St. George and the Dragon. It's no different than even something like St. Christopher's story for Catholics. It's just told in a different way. With ignorance being dragged off to hell,
Yep.
ignorance was with Christian the entire time. And it's clear that new names are given to people when they achieve a certain something to them. You know, your name is what you are. Ignorance reaches old age and dies, but he's removed not because he was some wicked man in the sense of the world. He was as much of a friend to Christian as he could be, and there are other Christians, who are with Christian, who are martyred and stuff like that. Ignorance has seen it all. Ignorance is aware of it all. He has been told it all. He actually is ignorant by choice at that point. He's met Christian, who has literally seen the cross and felt his sins go from him. I believe he saw the preacher who was martyred. He has seen all these different things, and he keeps getting hooked, if I recall correctly, because I'm not at that ending part of the story yet, but I do know the beats. He keeps getting, tempted away by things and comes back. He doesn't really betray them, I don't think, but he's not really a faithful friend. Uh, Faithful is the name of the guy who gets martyred, I think. Which, like, just because Christian's the main character, a lot of the side characters are like different Christians you can be. So, like, if you just find yourself like the dude who just shows people things that are allegories inside your allegorical story, how literal is this metaphor? Pretty literal. Um, these things, he's gone through them. He shouldn't be ignorant anymore. He should have a new name. He should be a new creature, but he's never a new creature. He is always ignorance. So if there's a meaning to it, if there's a theme to it, in the end, even though salvation is only by the cross, the theme of Pilgrim's Progress is the Christian life itself. What you experience, what you do in it, how you work in it, what can you do as a Christian? And it's more than just, oh, I'm a Christian now. No, 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 no. How are you living? You meet Mr. Worldly Wise Man who says he has a different idea. You meet a Catholic priest, I can't remember his name, but it's like Papist or something, who's on a mountain, and the mountains threaten to fall in on you, and he's like, what does this mean? Well, it's the weight of the law that you can never fulfill that, Catholics tended to push forward at the time. More than they do now, for those who don't know. Uh, yeah, anyway. we're not getting into it. He meets a guy
Yeah.
who's like, "Hey, you want that heavenly gold, right? Well, I've got a gold mine." And it's like clearly this guy's like, crypto Jew or something. But it's like, he's tempted away by, ignorance is tempted away by
Gonna
money
make a
for a
version
moment.
of Pilgrim's Progress where the character that's just named Crypto Jew.
Uh Stop it. Uh but yes. There's all these things to it that, like, what do you do? Like, this isn't just about business or something like that. This is about the spiritual love of money. It's not, literal, Zionism or whatever. It's the idea of, not being a Christian man, of industry, of courage, of all these things, but rather turning aside to worship money. Why don't you just be a moneylender? Why don't you own this gold mine? And of course, it's also implied that they would be murdered on the way to this gold mine because really it's just a bandit. But all these things keep coming on. The city of worldly pleasures or whatever it's called. Literal abandon running around. You will have to face as a Christian many different things. And even though it's not a Bible, it's certainly able to help those, especially those who aren't like theologically gifted, to abjure these things. Hey, this guy who says, hey, let's make this money together. It'll be so easy. And like he's just this random dude. Hey, listen, it's probably a scam. God isn't actually giving you a gold mine like this. And somebody could be like use that as a way to reject it without being too confused. Uh, there's a lot to it that just kind of shouldn't get lost, but it gets lost in what people think of it. Like we were joking about like crypto Jew and stuff like that, but it's more than just the spirit of something popular or Semitic or philo-Semitic or anti-Semitic. It's what does the spirit of the metaphor of the allegory mean to the reader who's consuming this. There's a reason why Pilgrim's Progress was like the number two book for the longest time ever. And it wasn't just because it was, the English people and stuff like that. Everyone understood that there was biblical meaning. Uh, there was biblical meaning inside Pilgrim's Progress that a boy or a girl could read and achieve great things from it. Like there's a reason why, the Catholics needed like the big Summa Theologica. There's a reason why if you go to any biblical college, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, you'll see entire libraries of biblical commentary. I have no clue how big a
Mm-hmm.
Catholic library is at this point in time, but quite frankly, it's got to be bigger than the Protestant ones, and we cover whole basements. You know, uh, and many of them are very worth it. Um, there's one great one of a Jew who converted to Christianity, and you read his work, and it's like listening to a man who's found water for the first time in his life. He's filled with love for his Savior, and all the things about it. And you compare that to drier works that say, hey, this is the all the meanings for this verse. Like I was at a men's group, and they were looking at a certain verse that says that it's in Ephesians. It's like Ephesians 4 or something like that, and it refers to Christ taking the dead out of the lower parts of the earth. And we debated what that means, and I said, what does the Greek mean? Does the Greek mean literally the bowels of the earth, as in like journey to the center of the earth, or 6 feet under, or does it mean something like hell? And I know for a fact that they use hell or Sheol or whatever you want to say as a metaphor for the lower parts of earth, as a metaphor for same words is what I'm trying to say. So if that verse says that Christ went down into the lowest parts of the earth and meant Sheol, well, that means he went down to the lowest parts of the earth and went Sheol. Does that mean that Abraham's bosom is currently empty? There's only heaven. or does it mean that he actually went down to hell and pulled out like, Plato and Trajan and Aristotle and all this other guys who, came to a knowledge of God? Well, not Trajan, but uh, some Catholics liked him a lot, and so that's why I said it. Um, you
Um,
know,
so it comes from a medieval legend. If you don't know,
I don't.
uh, it's actually it's very short but pretty interesting.
Is
Basically, the legend is that a pope like he really liked Trajan, but Trajan was in hell, so he prayed for Trajan, who came back to life, and then he like baptized him, and then he died again.
amazing.
Uh,
I
Like
don't.
there's nothing to it. It's just a legend, but
Yes,
like that's why in Dante's Inferno Trajan is in heaven.
right. This is big Mussolini's in heaven energy, Anthony. Uh,
Yeah.
so
All the mystics say it.
stupid. Stupid. It's so stupid. Uh, anyway. Uh, so getting back to it, I joked earlier that we're just gonna bring everything back to Jesus Christ. Well, that's actually true. These things that we're
You've all
discussing,
been fooled.
you've been
It
fooled.
was me, Dio, all along.
It was me, Jesus Christ allegory all along.
Eh.
I've made some YouTube shorts and they're worth looking through because I go over several of these concepts. Like often writers who are not Christian write God to be whatever they want, and they make it a sort of allegory, not to the real God, even though they intend it to be, a replacement for the real God, but rather for their own version of God. Like there's a science fiction story about people trying to find the origin of these species. Was it these insect aliens? And was it these ape aliens? Was it this? Was it that? Was it this? Was it that? And they get down to the middle of a megastructure, and it's just God computer. And he's like, life's not meaningful at all. Uh, Screw and be happy. And it's like, this is disgusting. I don't like it.
Yeah,
This is
it's
no
awful.
God at all. Gantz has a similar thing. It ended with the main characters fighting the ultimate aliens, and the ultimate alien like, you guys' life is meaningless. I just reconstruct you from your brain patterns. And by the way, they aren't that complex. You lost XYZ friend. Well, here they are back. It's literally meaningless. I'm going to kill you because it's meaningless. Like it's utterly nihilistic. There's a reason why Gantz has not been replaced by another truly popular thing as Gantz. You look at things like The Dragon Never Sleeps by Glenn Cook. There's no God in that. Instead, there's these super ships and an ultimate space empire that regenerates itself. Like it's simply, like there's nothing to gain there spiritually or otherwise. Self-sacrifice is meaningless. There's no Christ. There's only the dragon, which are these super ships named after the Roman legions. You look at World War Z, what does religion get you in the face of zombie apocalypse? But in reality, these characters all need meaning, otherwise they start committing suicide or just murdering people, or have no meaning. You look at things like Solomon Kane. We're right back where we started, baby. Solomon Kane. The meaning comes from God's justice. God's justice. God loves um, good, honest measuring. Excuse me. God loves an honest measure. He loves honest measuring weights. He hates injustice. He hates it when the weak are cheated and the strong vaunt without reason. He set up the rules of this world in Eden, and he doesn't consider them changed just because you're sinful now. Looking at the Nightlands, God and Christ's hands are everywhere there as the small powers that keep men alive and the love that people have for each other. In Let's see here, I'm literally looking through my library. Paradise Lost. I wonder about that one. The
But where is God in that story?
I don't know. You look at things even like video games. Bioshock 2, God's clearly in there. In the metaphor of father for daughter and for the people around them. False religion falls apart and you're killed for it by a dude, a big daddy looking for his little sister. Uh, let's see here. Some things, just don't have it, but then there's a shocking absence. Even the absence of Christ, of religion, is felt in so many of these stories. You might say, well, these Chinese wuxia stories don't have it. Well, quite frankly, there's only one Chinese wuxia story, and that's Journey to the West, and it's not really that good. Where's Christ in the Iliad?
Well,
I said what I said. Where's Christ in the
eh,
Iliad and the Odyssey? Well, it's not, like it's about men versus the gods. In the end, the gods are just as unjust as the men. Poseidon is vengeful for vengeance's sake, not for anything truly high minded. It's not even really justice, it's just somebody hurt my boy. I gotta take it out on them. Zeus has his justice, but it's not even really justice in the sense of ultimate law beyond himself that even he follows. He performs acts of justice because the gods are offended or somebody directly offends him. You go through these things, whether atheist or God fearing or deist or Buddhist or anything like that, everything comes around the spiritual nature of man. Even things like Nightfall and other things like other sci-fi stories, again, keeps running into it. Why do these people live without anything to live for? They're just doing it to do it. Where does their curiosity come from? Why must they search? Well, because we don't know what's on the other side. Okay, well, what does that mean? What sort of other side is there? What about death? What about the existence beyond existence? I think we just disappear when we die. So why does it matter that you're curious? They are remarkably silent on it, or they just say, well, it's worth it just to do it. Like the people who say art redeems life, which I also agree with, because I believe that art as an emanation of the Holy Spirit, even they have an issue with God because they oftentimes just don't see God, even though technically an artist should be seeing God in all the things that he does and say and do and gets inspiration from. Art, all good art or all worthwhile art, is literally dragged from the Holy Spirit, given to us. I've read The Art of People who have no hope, who have no spirit. Uh, they just talk about their lives. Their meaningless, insignificant lives. Their pathetic little, fights with daddy because daddy did this, and so I'm gonna say all dads are sons of bitches. Which is the one of the subtexts for that horrid poem we mentioned earlier on in the story, where
mhm.
and of course all moms are bitches too, but like, he's talking, like in the context of what I'm talking about, there's that meaning to it. Like, and people gave an award recently, like a $10,000, excuse me, reward to a poem that was just some dude complaining about his home life. That's not inspired poetry. There's no God there. Then there's an absence of
Mhm.
God. Being angry at Father is just them being angry at God too. There's a reason why women often become Christian through the influences of their father, but also if their father wasn't Christian, through the forgiveness of their father, as in them forgiving their father. It goes in
Mhm.
hand at hand. We go through literature, through the themes of life, and all these other things, and that I found anyway, time and time and time again, that there is a spiritual need for man to pursue the good, the beautiful, the true, to pursue a sort of Christ-like attitude towards everything that goes on around him. Even things like Bioshock Infinite, which are very anti-Christian, basically say that there's no answer and there's a multiverse and original sin can be drowned at the baptismal font. It's ridiculous, it's nonsense, but it's a man's attempt to answer something as deep and abiding as the death of men and women and the racism and the communism and the jingoism and all this other stuff without Christ. It's very clear that the Columbia, the City in the Clouds, is a Mormon thing rather than a Christian thing, if you get me, on the spectrum. Even things like
Yeah,
House of
Bioshock Infinite is an evil game.
yes,
I liked it.
it's
It's evil.
great. Yeah, I enjoyed the spots where I killed communists. That was pretty good.
It
Socialists.
was fun.
Yes. Even things like House of Leaves, they're facing something ultimate, unknowable. A house that's slightly bigger on the inside than the outside. And then, of course, Into the Maze, which has a minotaur. And men who go in go crazy. And there's 1,000 little things that, are in there. But what's the theme? Is it just that life has no meaning, to do what you can? To have 1,000 little who knows what's? I don't know. I couldn't tell you. And unfortunately, that's kind of where I have to end it with that one. Like, it's just like, what is the meaning to it? I don't know. Various things happen at random, and even then, it doesn't even go down to life is so random. It's literally, I'm terrified of this unknowable thing. I cannot investigate it. I can only look at it third hand through the work of a blind Japanese man. I myself being a drunk about a these, and even then the blind Japanese man isn't actually watching the Davidson record. He's gathering information about people who are talking about the Davidson record. So there's like 5 different levels between him and the original work about and the events. Like, you can't know. Like, but the thing is that we are facing a very knowable God compared to what these things are. We can know him through his word. Whatever people say, the great works of English literature will always be related to the Bible. Whether directly through things like allegory or metaphor, or indirectly through the spirit of the thing, the pursuit of the good, the beautiful, and true, which is inspired by God Himself and the Holy Spirit. All right, I think I'm
Yep.
ranted out. Uh, like, where does
Drink
the
more Ovaltine.
yep, where does the honor come from for the Three Musketeers? That sort of thing. Storyteller says, "Dang, I missed Achilles' heel story. Don't worry, it's still up there." They continue.
Also,
She, I think.
Achilles is like referenced in one line. So sorry.
Eh. Yeah, no. Well, what do you mean referenced in one line? You wholesale quote the Iliad. It's the climax of the
Like
story.
it is, yes,
Ugh.
but not. Yeah, it's not like what it's about though. Anyway, keep going.
Yes. Actually, storyteller continues. Actually, I think the constantly morphing villain makes me think that of reading scripture about reading scripture and how not to reading the word. It's almost like you forget what you look like in a mirror. If you don't have a standard to aim for, you become aimless, and it goes as far as knowing what your identity is, even if there was a measurement. Enmeshment. Actually, there was a big fan about a certain woman's foot about that time. I'm sorry. No. Trilby foot? No. No. Son of a. No. 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 No.
I got nothing to add.
I want to die. Anyway, Eldritch fan just tuned in. What did I miss? The series of unfortunate events. Netflix series improves on the books in several ways. I like the TV series ending better. Don't you know that the movie is best? Did you ever read
No,
Snickett's prequel, All the Wrong Questions? I think a nihilistic story is one where none of the characters can accomplish anything. Well, it's more about the spirit that they do it in.
yeah,
Like,
like I'm not gonna bring up the Savage Boy again, 'cause I do it all the time, but it's the spirit of the story that makes a difference. And
mm-hmm,
also, by the way, the ending of I will say that you are correct about the ending of the Netflix series, but And to be fair to the books, the ending of the Netflix series was not entirely new. They took it from the spin off book, The Beatrice Letters, and just appended that ending to the original series. So basically, what they're talking about is that at the end of the Netflix series, it's like an older, the end of the book, the original book series, is that the Baudelaires sail off, and you don't know what happens next.
Mm-hmm.
So the Netflix series continues on after this point of Lemony searching for them, and he can't find them, right? And he has like a notebook, and literally on the notebook he's crossed off all these possibilities, and the only one left is bottom of the ocean with a question mark. So he's just like alone and depressed. And then a little girl walks into like the restaurant he's in or something, and says, "Are you Lemony Snicket? Because my name is Beatrice Baudelaire, and I was raised by the Baudelaire orphans. Would you like to know what happened to them?" And he says, "I'd like that very much." And then she starts telling him, like, the story of what happened next. And that's how the series ends. It's a very good ending. It's much better than the ending of the final book in the series. However, it's not entirely original to Netflix. It's from a spin-off book called The Beatrice Letters. It's unfortunate that it was kept in a spin-off, but I'm glad that the Netflix series had the wisdom to use it.
Hmm. Okay.
Anyway, keep
Uh,
going with reader with user comments.
Last one, Eldritch fan, unpopular opinion, and it is, sir. I'll put you in the shame box. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe Disney movie is better than the book. No. Uh,
No, you're going in the crystal.
yeah, you're absolutely right. I was soft to put you in the punishment box. You're going in the crystal. Uh, I will fund you.
So that movie, I will say, this is what I have to say about that movie. When I first saw it, I really, really liked it, right?
Yes.
Then I had a conversation with Jaji, who did not like it, and I was like, "Why didn't you like it?" It's like, "Well, they ruined Peter." And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, "How they ruin Peter?" They're like, "Look at the way he reacts to the wall. Like he acts like," and now I cannot unsee it. And that conversation, like he acts like a coward when he deals with the wolf. He's unsure of himself in a way he's not in the
Yep.
book. I cannot unsee it. It ruined that movie for me. I can't enjoy it anymore
Mm-hmm. And like the thing with
because
like,
she's completely correct.
by the way, most of these adaptions take out Mulgrim going fortunate favorite of the witch, or else not fortunate favorite of the queen, or else not so fortunate, which is one of those lines I've got indelibly marked on my brain as just like evil going, yeah, you think you're hot stuff, something,
Mm,
like you're just
it's a
not.
great line.
It's a great line. All right, guys. I hope you understood what I was ranting about. Um, these things are very important to how you consume your media, not for a media literacy dumb POS thing, but rather about how it, how do I want to put it, about how it affects your soul. Reading is food for the mind and the soul, and the body as well, if it helps you exercise better. If you fill your head with bad things, with poor metaphors, with allegories that just allude to sex, to nihilism, to the spirit of the age, to a clockwork universe, or worse, a universe with no clockwork whatsoever. It just happens to be this way. It will affect you, and it'll affect you negatively. Um, so it's like God talks about it all the time. Sweet to the lips, sour to the stomach. And that's for that stuff. Except it rots out the soul. Uh, all right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Anthony. We'll try to have something more interesting for you next week. I want to thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend as winter starts up. Goodbye.